Hello, and welcome to American Amnesia. I'm your host, Cliff Garner, and I've tried to do this one a couple of times. I've got a bunch of books that I've been looking through my library, and also I've picked up a few while I've been out and hitting the secondhand stores. At any rate, I'll just kind of go through them. I'm gearing up for writing up a small book or a long article or something comparable with discussing the Great Sellout. I think it's an event, or actually more of a social process that occurred in the 70s that reduced the New Left to virtual non-existence, and actually was more important probably in the long run for the formation of the Democratic Party into the entity it still remains today. I think that the significance of the Great Sellout on several levels, and in several different very key social, political, and even economic matters, issues and stuff that kind of converge from understanding this thing that happened back in the 70s, and it was a slow process, and so it wasn't like overnight. It wasn't a faddish thing. Although for a while there, it had a lot to do with what the fashion was and stuff. In fact, it influenced the clothing and hair and other fashions, right? The things were all kind of tied together. Almost destroyed the whole concept of the counterculture as a consequence of the process of really the left and the young devouring themselves. The generational politics that won't go away. The demographic emphasis on politics. These things all are part and parcel of not just the Great Sellout, but the whole New Left and the new that whole first wave boomer, how self-lauding they were for so long, and how they piggybacked their youth on mine, and the second wave boomers. That all these things come together, and when you look at it, so it is an important process, and it's an important entity, I suppose, in a way, or well, maybe not an entity, but more of a key development, I suppose, would be better. But it's been neglected because the first wave boomers still don't want to face up to what they did. They don't want to hear the criticism that they had coming then, and still have coming today, and also for what they're doing now with the millennials that they're cry bullies that they've been making. This is just part of the adding to the shame of what they had done in the first place, compounding their sins with really repeating them. Only now it's a lot later, and it's even worse in some ways. That these young people don't even have the tools really to deal with life in a realistic manner. And a lot of it is the delusions that they're giving them today. So this is an important thing to me, at least, and I think some of the people that went through it also would agree. So I'm looking at materials towards that. Some of these are things that are going to fill in some other gaps. I will refer to some of them, but I picked these out from the books that I have already had and some of the newer editions for their interest. And let's start with this one. Oh, that was interesting. We'll start with this one, and I just bought this one today. I've read this long time ago. Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, and I picked that up today. I picked this up a few days ago, and that was over at this one I got from. No, I've had this one for a while, and it's sitting around. And I read it a long time ago. I really liked Toffler. I think he's dead now. And I found him interesting that he would write about trends and stuff as he thought they would develop in the future, and he had a lot of really interesting insights into how things were developing then at the time, and how they would later on. And one of the things that was most frightening about Toffler was the isolation that technology would give to people, and I think that he's been partially right about that. I don't think he had any way of seeing things like Facebook and YouTube and all those coming up the way they did, but there were things about that he did see, and it'll be interesting to go back and look at some of the things he had to say back then, and how it may have turned out today. See how far off he was. So that's one thing, and it's. There may actually be some stuff in there that will fill in some blanks for what I'm researching. This one here, Independent Nation. I was using this for my program back in 2004 and 2005 before I left for China, when I was doing the original American Amnesia program and on public access here in Springfield. 2005. There's one of my bookmarks. But anyway, this book, Independent Nation: How Centrists Can Change American Politics. I've long been saying that redefining the center as a dynamic place politically, I think is going to be key to what happens in the future. And for the first time in a long time, I've actually seen somebody reaching into the center in this dynamic way. Generally speaking, and one of the things that the book pointed out, the Independent Nation here, is that the two parties, it's not necessarily left-right paradigm, but what the two parties have to do, or have usually done, let's put it that way. What they would usually do was they would have to go to the disparate and diverse parts of the party, and they're flung all over the place ideologically and philosophically, and they would have to kind of cater to them and bring them in, and that was always the process leading up to the conventions for president. Okay, so there would be this attempt to play up to certain parts of the party over others, but trying to unify it nonetheless before it was all said and done. And then from the convention forward, the goal was to reach into the center and pull in as many people from the center to the extreme, actually, that they have to some degree occupy all along. With the Democrats, it would be more to the left. With the Republicans, a little bit more to the right. It wouldn't necessarily be so far, and of course that's always changing, right? As the pendulum swings. But the thing was that was the dynamic. I have long maintained that coming from the center and moving out would actually be a lot more sensible, and I still think that. And really, what Trump did was that he spoke to the common person, and that's probably one of the fastest ways to get to the center. And this is where the populist angle comes in. And by the way, there's also this one. It's from 1972. This is something I read back then, and was also has been very influential on my thinking ever since, because it also talks about drawing together a center. So, taking the center through a populist or a communitarian, or even just a centrism that isn't beholden to the large corporate interests, but rather is looking at the people. See, it does come back to this basic populist concept of the people. And I'll come to something else in just a second here. But the thing is starting from that beginning, the core from the center, I would rather have that 15% than the 15% from the left or right, because that is a better place to reach out to all. You might not get the extremes, but you can get a lot up to the liberals to conservatives, and maybe unify them all into one consensus, actually, which is a beautiful thing. The center is the place of consensus. Now, one of the things Alinsky talked about, and I liked Alinsky, not everything he said and not everything he did, but he had a lot of really good advice. And one of the things that he said often in Rules for Radicals is, when you talk about power to the people, which people are you talking about? Those are the ones you're trying to empower. And the idea of a small elite leading the greater number of people was very appealing to him. But I always kind of disliked that. Although the idea of who are you talking about does strike me as significant. And if your answer is the average person, which is most people, then you have to look at gaining a consensus. And he would have said that himself. You need to bring them together with the right ideas. And I think that's where we're going here. And what you'll find is that people readily agree on their own, because they really don't see things too differently from the next person. And this doesn't, I mean, the things like race and background and all that, economics, they are factors and that shape a person's viewpoint. But at the same time, most people are pretty well in agreement on things like what's right and what's wrong, what's needed and what isn't. And so the consensus that they would form on their own, especially if they have a respect for one another, I think doesn't take a whole lot of management by any self-proclaimed elite or guidance or whatever you want to call it. That maybe that the organic formation of what they are going to produce themselves will be just about right to start with. And the best leaders have always been able to stand back and let other people do what they need to do, and to actually be able to take credit for themselves, not the leader, but the people that they motivate, to take credit for themselves, saying that we did it. And I think what we see with Trump as a business person, and as a kind of a motivational kind of person as well, I think what you see is this kind of thinking. He's a very good listener. And I think that is a difference between him and, say, even Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had a lot of sympathy. He had a lot of emotional leanings. And I don't think that it was always necessarily dishonest. I mean, I think that he really did feel for people. But I don't know that he really had what I would call empathy. I think it was more of a sympathetic kind of thing. That he would hear the emotion and he would lean towards that and kind of relate to it. I think what you have here, because he really does listen and does kind of form his ideas from that. Because what I was watching, and part of how I got convinced to vote for him, after I realized that Johnson wasn't gonna do anything, was that I watched what he did, and I paid attention to how he did listen, especially when he was talking to the black churches there for a little while. I think that the respectful way that he acted in there really said a lot to me, and it struck me. At any rate, I think that we're on the right track, because I am seeing some of the things that were talked about even way back then, and this time kind of coming together. Now, one of the most significant books that I've read over the years, I think, is this one, Conspiracies, Cover-Ups, and Crimes, Political Manipulation and Mind Control in America by Jonathan Vankin. This book needs to be updated, and I don't know if Mr. Vankin is going to be up for doing it. I hope he does. He's still writing. I think he was doing some stuff with Salon, maybe. Salon or maybe HuffPo or something. But he's still around. I ought to write him a letter and say, hey, why don't you redo that one? And it was a great book. I mean, what he did was really interesting. He gave examples. He talked to the people that believed in these different theories and everything else. But this needs to be updated pretty badly. The material is very dated now, and I think that newer examples not only easy to get, but actually would grab people's attention. He could actually do it as an addendum to the book, and I think people would really appreciate it. And his writing style is very, very, very good too. It was an entertaining book, well written, well researched, and Vankin, his thesis was this: basically that in times of great secrecy, official secrecy, that causes people to use conspiracy theories to fill in the blanks in order to take the anomalies and to explain them in some way that they can function with knowing that these facts. And usually what you'll have with a conspiracy theory is a couple key facts. Some of them are just kind of really weird, don't seem to fit anywhere. And these are not false. I mean, these are actual things that happened, or things that that there's evidence for, and you can examine the evidence. And this is part of the problem with conspiracy theories, is that they do have this part of truth. Now the issue becomes far more complex when you see how the theorist or theorists take that information and weave a full-fledged narrative around. See, this is one of the big problems the Democrats have, and I find this to be something we could lay at the doorstep of Michael Moore. Moore was always more concerned about the narrative than he was about the facts. And so what you had with Moore was always this pastiche of fact and fiction, and he would manipulate it however he wanted to. And what you have right now is this narrative that they're not giving up on, and they are not willing to acknowledge the facts as they are. They're still wanting to bend things into the narrative. And we see that with the Russian thing. We see that with the spy thing. And there's nothing there. They base it on hooey. Just pig poop, just not even worth mentioning. The thing with the the piss dossier. I mean, what is that? That's not even a good lie, but there's a lot of them that believe it. And then you got the crap with the Russians, and there were two documents that they put out, and the first one was like a dossier, not a dossier, more of a sales tract, that they would give you for maybe McAfee or something, and it had a little bit in there talking about was it the red polar bears or some crap like that were doing fishing. And then it ended up sounding like an advertisement for McAfee on keeping your computer safe, I mean, that was such crap. If you read it with any kind of a objectivity, at all, it's like, what is this? This is garbage. This is garbage. And then the other one, where they, they're really couching their language. Well, we're kind of sure about this, but we can't prove that, and blah blah blah. But so and so thinks it might just be. Yeah, right. A lot of weasel words, a lot of nothing. That's your narrative. The narrative is more important than the facts that they have, trying to prop it up, and it's not even being propped up very well. There's some small wonder that Obama's peeing himself now. I mean, apparently he's been out spying on everybody anyway, which, we should have figured from Snowden. He came right out and said it, that they were listening to all your phone calls, that they were looking at all your emails. I mean, come on, folks. If you're not being spied on, I know I was overseas. I mean, it was a given. It was a given. So, I know that people were listening to my phone calls, calling home, talking to my mom, talking to my brothers, talking to my friends sometimes. So, I'm going to just figure that. I knew it anyway. I lived in China for a year. There were all kinds of crazy things happening to the phone here at the house. But you don't care. You want to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. But you know something? Blow off. You don't know what you're talking about. I do. And the fact is that there are people that have come out and said it. The NSA was intercepting all our phone calls anyway back in the 1970s. Come on, don't you remember the church committee? Good grief, folks. This is exactly why I called my show American Amnesia. It really is. Because, I have to deal with people that are just acting brain dead so often because they don't remember anything. They don't think about anything. They buy the narrative. The narrative isn't worth paper when it's printed. The paper is worth more. The narrative is to smooth out those little gaps in between in a way that they want you to look at it. So, when you talk about conspiracy theories, the narrative is just the same thing. Really is. There is no real substantial difference in what they're doing. There's all these huge gaps in it, and they're covering lies. Lies are just like, in the economics where you have a bubble. There's no substance. And because there's no substance there, sooner or later, that void is going to collapse under the weight of something that's real. Sooner or later, that's what's going to happen. And it always does. And that's what you're seeing right now. That narrative is collapsing all over the place. Every time they hold it up, it falls right back down. And they're trying to blame Trump for it. He's an easy target. And he knew he was going to get into that if he was really serious about draining the swamp when he first got in. Had to know what was in that swamp. I mean, what's in a swamp? All kinds of nasty stuff. Probably a few dead bodies, too. Probably a few people back in there. They're probably the most dangerous. They're probably worse than the alligators. So, it's like what we're seeing coming out of there, all the nasty creatures that are slithering and sliming and everything else all over the place. We shouldn't be surprised at them. Not in the least. And Obama, he's probably one of the worst of them at all. Because he's trying to hold on to power for some reason. He should be going golfing. Go golfing. Maybe take up surfing. That'd be a good idea. He's from Hawaii originally. Of course, he could come back here to Chicago and hang out with Rom. They can go cruising. That's what I heard they did anyway. Okay, well, there's some other things in here. This is Jacques Ellul. It is Autopsy of Revolution. I'm sure that there's some little tidbits in here on the forces that were in play. This was written in 1971. And in Europe, the what we call the revolution, and over here we called it the movement, that kind of packed up a little earlier than it did here. And part of the reason was the Vietnam War was continuing. And over here, that remained a really big issue pretty much right up until Jerry Ford shut it down in 1975. And I remember that pretty well because I was still in school. And so when I graduated in 1976, there was all this hoopla, patriotic, wave the flag, hey, America, USA, right, all that kind of thing. We got it, so much of it fed to us that it for a lot longer than a year, that it affected the patriotism of a few of us. It took me a pretty good while to come to terms with it. And it was partly because it was shoved down all of our throats collectively, and I've always resented that kind of thing where the culture would force feed you stuff, especially like the disco and the different styles and stuff. I gave up on fashion at a really early point, and to this day I wouldn't have any problem wearing something just outlandish just for the sheer fun of it. Not that I do it all the time anymore, but I really wouldn't hurt my feelings any. So this that was a factor there, here in the U.S. But with going back to Illil, over in Europe, you probably had more of a sellout really than you did in the States right off the bat when the 70s hit. I have the feeling, and I can't really say it for sure, but a lot of it would have been more more necessity that you would need to go to work. There wasn't as much of the American, find yourself kind of thing going on. We really had the me generation and everything else that came up, and this was all tied in with the same stuff. I'll be searching through some of that material too. But the Autopsy of Revolution, one of the things that he noted was that revolution went from being a episodic kind of event, and it turned more into a mindset that never went away, and that this was the social malaise, malady, I suppose would be better word for it. That this would be kind of a thing that would be not attention, but a tension that many people would feel for day to day. So it went from a rare occasion to really a way of living. And that this would lead to other sociological issues. I need to reread it. It's been a while. Been a long while. That's one of them. And this one here, very key book. The Irony of Democracy, An Uncommon Introduction to American Politics by Diane Ziegler. They were two professors. This was a textbook that was used in the colleges for a long time. This version was 81. Mine, when I first went to school, I don't remember what year or which edition it was. But I went in 77, and it had been out for a while then. It might have still been the first edition that I was using. But the thing about Diane Ziegler is that this book explains the elites behind the system probably the best of any work I've ever read. Now, there have been other attempts. You had Mark Rudd's Yankee Cowboy War, and you had Kirkpatrick Sale's Sun Belt thing. Kind of a similar thesis. You had others. They're trying to show the dynamics of elitist politics, and for a long time you kept hearing of the Sun Belt versus the Rust Belt, and all this kind of stuff, and I kind of would read that, and it's like, okay, some of it, but some of it not so much. But the Irony of Democracy actually did a pretty good job of it. It was really well done, and they don't call it that, but the deep state is explained. You have your political elite, which is the people who are basically elected. You have your corporate elites. You have your banking elites. You have your the old money, the new money, the nouveau riche, right? That kind of thing. You have your upcoming people and stuff, and then this is it cuts across the economic, socioeconomic classes and races and everything else. I mean, the elites are sort of like the pillars that hold up society, and one of the pillars, one of the elites, is the perennial bureaucratic elite that's especially strong in Washington, but it's all over the U.S. and each state has it too. That these people are the ones that from one administration to the next, they're always there, and they're not going anywhere, and that's part of the deep state. The deep state should explain itself. I mean, it is what is underneath the surface. You take off the facade and what's underneath. Well, what's there? This is there. And is there a criminal elite? Well, yeah, I don't recall Diane Ziegler really going into that much. But yeah, there is. And it would be foolish to completely ignore that. Actually, it's been a while since I read it. I don't think they really go into that. But when you look at the assassination of JFK, there's all this deep state kind of thing in the background there. Basically CIA meets the mafia kind of stuff. But there's also this Texas kind of connection, which LBJ's the person who obviously benefited, and maybe was most frightened by what he saw and knew. I think that his behavior after he lost power I think you can point to him and say, that he probably had a lot of ghosts. He probably had quite a few of them that were sitting there, booing him and clanking their chains. So, yeah, you can see that. It's I can see it. I can see it big time. But you have that, and you have what happened with Nixon, and these stories will probably never ever be fully explained. But what happened with Nixon? There were so many forces at play behind the scenes that we'll never know about them all. But we just won't. There's like there was the fear, concern that he was going to try to bring about some kind of a military intervention to prevent him being removed. There was a possibility of martial law. In fact, there was rumors going around while I was in Washington, D.C., and that was 1974, while he was being... He was on the very last little legs of what he was doing, and he was out of there before much longer. I think we went in July, and he was gone in August. And we were standing at the back of the White House. And I was yelling at it, take him out of there, throw him out, and there were a couple other of us, yelling, but, we were idiots, teenage idiots. But, our group was, we were really tourists, technically, And I'd met John Kerry, that they were protesting the war on the Capitol steps, and so we went to the Capitol, and there he was, and they had the tiger cages, and I got in, and I talked to them a long time. I missed a little bit of the tour on account of that. It was cool, I got attention from some older people that, I thought were cool. And they were a bunch of Vietnam vets. They were wearing a uniforms with the sleeves cut off, and headbands, and some of them had beards, and stuff. It was, it was pretty cool. They all smelled like weed, So. Oh boy! But at any rate, that was going on when I was there, but there were things going on behind the scenes. There was all kinds of crazy rumors going around of what was going on. And there's been a couple books written. There's one, Silent Coup, and it's talking about how Woodward from Woodward and Bernstein was actually connected to Alexander Haig, and he was one of the ones that gave briefings to Nixon before he retired from the service and became a reporter. And so he was actually getting CIA backing and stuff, and that Haig was supposedly deep throat and all this kind of stuff. So there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and the deep state was definitely involved in that. There was also rumors that he was going to mobilize some forces, and there was a general, I forget his name. He wrote a couple books on like the CFR and stuff that I can't think of his name now at all. But he supposedly was the one that intervened and made sure that they shut down any attempt at mobilization to save Nixon's presidency. There were other things that were discussed. I've got a few of them bookmarked, and I'll use them as resources and some stuff in the future here. But the one that I'm really wanting to dig into, as far as a deep state kind of research, is the businessman's plot, and that did include a lot of the business people, supposedly a lot of the big business people at the time of World War II, and just prior to it, actually. And this would be FDR, and FDR was considered a class traitor, much like Trump is today. And the businessman's plot was because they considered him a traitor to the class, and they didn't like some of the things he did. Glass-Steagall really rankled the bankers, for example. So there was a lot of resentment against him, and somebody took a shot at him and missed, and they killed Anton Cermak, the Tony Cermak, the mayor of Chicago back then. I think that was in 37 or 8, I think. I'd have to look it up. But the banker's plot was, or the businessman's plot was around that time. It was before the war, or before our involvement in it, at any rate. And so that was, I think that just because of the nature of who was involved and the fact that it was all behind the scenes, I don't think we'll ever find it all out. But supposedly they made an offer to Smedley Butler, who was was a general who was just immensely popular with the troops. And he marched on Washington, D.C. with a bunch of veterans that weren't being taken care of very well, and got recognized. But he also did that speech, War is a Racket, which I would recommend to anybody that's the least bit interested in peace, for one thing, but also American history, to understand it a little better, to take a look at that, because this country was not always a warmongering machine that was, all over the world putting out fires and, doing the behest at the behest of the big companies. It wasn't always the case. Butler saw what they did in Central America, and United Fruit down in was it Honduras? No, Nicaragua, and probably Honduras, and there was a lot of interventions that we did in Central and South America, and he resented being used in that way, and I think soldiers do, kind of resent that their sympathies with the big corporations are pretty small. Mine are. I don't have a lot of regard for the big corporations. And that's kind of a holdover from my leftism. But I don't see where it necessarily is left or right. That the big corporations tend to dominate business in a way that distorts capitalism. And as a matter of fact, they involve themselves with big government in ways that tend to not only undo capitalism, but also corrupt socialism. And I don't think we can trust either way to be a pure way. I don't think that we were ever a pure capitalist country. I think there was always some kind of a little tipping the scale from government, I think people were taking advantage of that a lot over the years. Maybe a little bit less in the beginning of the country, when you had the states as real entities. But I think with time that was less and less the case. At any rate, The Irony of Democracy, great book. I will be using stuff from it. In fact, there's some stuff I've already gone through, and I know kind of what I'm doing with a couple things from there. And last one that I pulled out, and this is definitely going to be good for the Great Sellout. The Destructive Generation, Second Thoughts About the 60s by Peter Collier and David Horowitz. And I've always liked Horowitz. I liked him when I was a leftist, and he did a TV show on for consumerism. Don't be fooled. And he'd actually test claims by different companies. For who has the crisper cornflakes, that kind of thing. But better cleaners and stuff like that. He would actually test them out. and it was fun. It was fun to watch, and he was really interesting. But he was originally Rampart's. Well, not originally, but he was the editor of Ramparts for quite a while. That was an excellent magazine. I read it while I was going to school. And it was like the foremost leftist paper, or not paper, but magazine at the time. They folded up in 1975. After that, Mother Jones kind of became the banner carrier, that they sold us out totally by the time I got out of high school in 1976. And Michael Moore was one of the ones that tried to force everything into the Democrats. I think he took over. I think it's 1978 is when he became editor. And he I remember what he did. I never liked him. So at any rate, those are some of the things I'm looking at. Some of the research that I'm kind of on the verge of digging in a little bit more. When I have some time, I'll be jumping into it. I've already got a few things in mind of what I'm going to do in the near future, as far as presenting some things for you to see. And I've got some things with Diane Ziegler that I'm going to do very soon, probably next few days. But I'm working on doing some serious writing on the Great Sellout, and that is something that I've been wanting to do for a while, and I'm trying to contact a few people also that I think would be very helpful in getting a perspective on it. My perspective, the more and more stuff is coming back to me as I sit there and think about it. It's been years, some of it I was trying to forget, I think, and it comes with things being so personal, and not only that, there's things that also, it might be years and years and years ago, but you look back at it and you almost kind of wish you didn't do certain things, and but one of the things I got led into from anarchism was that concept of a criminal activity as a political statement, and I really got into that, especially in those years prior to 1979. I got busted in 1979, and it kind of forced me to reevaluate that. But I was, something of a thug, I guess. So you look back on it, and it's like, do I want to open those wounds? And like, well, maybe it's a good thing to get it to, drain out some of the nastiness that's probably been infected for a long time. Strange how things like that just hang on to you. Till next time.